Good morning and welcome to Morning Coffee with Brigid. I am Brigid Burke, and today is the 8th of February, 2025. And this is a little bit better morning than yesterday was. Yesterday I was a little bit, put upon by certain things. And I'm watching the countdown here, so I don't think that it's showing on YouTube yet, but it should be showing soon. So we'll see who ends up joining us this morning. I'll probably give it a minute or two to see who actually comes on. Before I jump into the thing that's on my mind for today, and of course doing our daily reading as well. So, okay, it does look like somebody's on. So good morning. Yeah, this is like I said, this is going to be a day. I think today where I am in Jersey, it's going to be a little bit, and good morning, Kathleen, Alex, good morning. Good to see both of you. Yeah, it's going to be, right now, it's kind of cloudy, sun's come up. It's supposed to be icy later today. And of course, I'm teaching a Reiki class at noon today, Reiki Master Teacher class at noon over in the town of Chester. So that will be, hopefully, we will have our class. And good morning, Joanne, and good morning, Leela. Hopefully, we are going to have hopefully the weather today will hold, so that by the time I'm finished with my class, with everybody who's participating, that all of us will get home safely before any ice storms begin. My car is definitely not, my tires are definitely not set for this kind of weather. I was told to buy 4 new tires, like, oh, well, if you're going to be going out every day, I'm like, I go out almost never. So, to me, I was like, it's not that urgent. So, anyway, that's what's going on today. Glad you guys could join me. Okay, now, so I have an interesting topic for today. I was thinking about last night. I mean, I had, like a lot of nights, I had a lot of weird dreams, which I won't get into today. But I got an interesting message from Azrael this morning, and I think I actually kept it. So let's just see what the Enochian was for this. It was just have kind of out here. Dads ipams iaida feans oportlap etarzi aldi miam limlau roar. Okay, which literally means anger and vexation is coming to an end. The highest dwelling of light, as he calls it, is now for peace. Peace is gathering for the continuance of the treasure of the sun. Okay, that is the message that I got this morning, which I thought was a very nice message to share with people. Because certainly we have been talking about, I mean, I know yesterday I was certainly in a certain headspace, but I think a lot of people, at different times with all of the stressors that we are dealing with at the beginning, late 2024, beginning of 2025, and maybe the stressors that we deal with a lot, but it just feels like with the astrology and everything that things are kind of amplified. So it's interesting. So there's definitely this sense that we are in the middle of a transition, and I think consciously or not, this creates a kind of anxiety for us. So we're sitting here and we're just, feeling, even as we're getting on with our lives and focusing on our stuff, there's still that kind of undercurrent of unease about where are things going. So one of the things I wanted to talk about today was yugas. Excuse me. So I want to talk about, one of the conceptions, and Joanne, I think she's a friend of yours, Christine Marvel. I saw she had posted a chart of the yugas on her Facebook page. And I was looking at that chart, and I was kind of looking into some of the literature on yugas and what what a lot of them mean. So typically, there are 4 yugas. Okay, the cycles tend to start with Dwapara, then they move into Treta, then they move into Satya. And then from Satya, they go back to Dwapara, and then they go into Kali Yuga. Okay. So now, first of all, it's important to understand when we talk about Kali and Kali Yuga, that Kali is not it is a reference to a certain degree to the goddess Kali, but Kali is more of a term that is connected to time and the devouring of time. Okay. It's like a time that is kind of running out, because the word kala means time. And so this is about, so it's really more about Kali Yuga and Dwapara Yuga in particular tend to be about ambition. They tend to be about ambition, and on the extreme end of the scale with ambition, you have greed. Okay, and so when people, so you often will see in those particular ages, you will have a lot, you may have a lot of war, you may have a lot of greed, you may have a lot of things that people are, where people are competitive and jockeying for things, for position. Their use of power and spiritual power is more for for self gain, for power. In Hinduism, there's something called the siddhis, and the siddhis are connected with the shaktis, with the matrikas. They are there's usually considered to be 7 siddhis in tantra, and these are basically sometimes they refer to them as the occult powers, but they're basically 7 powers that we have over certain forces of the world. And this is what we tend to associate, certain magicians with. And the thing about people who attain siddhis, okay, which can happen with meditation and so forth, it's a question of, they will always tell you that the attainment of siddhis should never, ever be the goal of meditation. Because there's 2 classes of being in Hinduism. There's the devas, and then there's the asuras. Okay? And devas are gods, and asuras are, we use the term demon, but the word demon, as I've often indicated in Hinduism, means something very different. What you're basically looking at are 2 types of beings. Gods are immortal, okay? They live in a heaven, which, by the way, humans do not aspire to be devas, okay? Humans should not, they do not consider it to be beneficial, because once you're a god and you're immortal, that's kind of it. Like, there's no opportunity for you to achieve ultimate liberation, because you live forever, right? You drank from the ocean of Amrita. You have this. They live forever, and so really the best place to be is in a human body, because you have the consciousness and awareness to be able to see, to see the big picture. I mean, if you allow yourself to get outside of the kind of cage of your thoughts, and therefore you are able to liberate yourself from the cycle. So that's kind of the idea of the idea there. Now, asuras, both devas and asuras are spiritual type beings, and both of them can engage in spiritual practices. Like you'll hear, for example, on the deva side, you'll hear about Shiva, going, meditating for years and things like that. Asuras can do the same thing. They can sit and they can practice austerities and they can meditate and they can do all of these things for years, until the creator god Brahma or even Shiva grants them a boon. In other words, you have attained something as a result of your efforts. But typically what they want to attain is either they want immortality or they want something approximating it. Basically, they want to be invincible, is typically what asuras want. They want to be invincible and they want power. So that is what the difference is between them. One tends to be very materially focused, tends to be focused on power and how much power and status and wealth they can acquire for themselves. Devas do not have that focus, because devas are connected more to qualities that we consider to be more, I guess we'll say, more virtuous or more noble in the human condition. Having to do with with respect, having to do with love, with compassion, with all of these kinds of things. Although, if you follow Hindu mythology, devas also can sometimes fall into certain traps. Indra is the first deity that comes to mind, because Indra, when he defeated an asura called Vitra, he kind of got a very inflated opinion of himself and thought, "Oh, look at me, I'm the greatest god. I'm going to build this big thing." And eventually, Brahma had to send someone to kind of take his ego down a peg. And of course, but he was willing to learn and to change. So there's a difference in disposition there, because and it tells us something about our souls, because are we geared towards, understanding, like seeing the big picture, getting outside of just simply a life lived to acquire stuff, material things? Or are we able to see the bigger picture? Now, you have to understand in this system, a lot of times we try to look at it in good and evil terms. We will say, oh, well, the good people are striving for these qualities and the bad people all want material stuff. And that's not really how it is. Because there's nothing wrong with saying, hey, I'm living a life and I want to attain stuff and I want to be comfortable. That's always why I've said, that's always why I've always embraced Tantra, because Tantra to me is about weaving. That's literally the word means weave. It's about the way in which our different experiences are woven together. And some of our desires are going to be to, I don't know, see the bigger picture. And some of our desires are going to be to, to have stuff, I want to have a house. I want to have a car. I want to have enough money to do the things that I want. There's nothing wrong with wanting those things. We kind of have this idea that anything, that this is actually a very Western idea. Material things are bad. Wanting anything material is bad. And I would say, no, it's not that wanting material things is bad, but when that becomes your obsession, when that becomes your drive, when it's because the problem is when let's just say you get a good job and you have a house and you have some money, then it's never enough. Well, I have to have more money and I have to have this and I really have to have this and that. Like we always, you unfortunately get caught in this trap of it's never enough. It's never enough. It's never enough. That's the demon Raktavera. The seed of desire. Once it's planted, it just keeps going and going and going. And the more you try to kill it, like the worse it gets. So there's this idea that the seed of desire is the thing that that can really throw us off. Now, when we're talking about yugas, we're talking about cycles and ages. In Western religion, what we will frequently talk about is the idea, like what we see, for example, a lot of people, when they think of the end of the world, they think of the book of Revelation, right? They will think of, like, this is a linear process. Like, we're along, the world started here, and now it's going to end here. Like, we're all kind of on this thing. And then Joanne saying slave to the grind. Yes, that can certainly be, that certainly can be part of that desire, an obsessive desire to have. Yes, absolutely. And so we tend to think of it as linear. There's a starting point to history and then there's an end point. That's not the way it works in the cycle of yugas. It's a cycle, literally. And as you leave one, you enter another one. So Kali Yuga is characterized by, this is a very material age. And generally the assumption has been that we are currently in Kali Yuga, right? That's even been my assumption, okay? I've often said that. I was like, yeah, we're in Kali Yuga, which is classed by materialism, greed, a lust for power, and that sort of thing. However, in doing some research, not everybody sees the yuga cycle in the same way. I do remember Alan Watts talking about the yugas at one point, and he had kind of said people will say, like some people will say a yuga is 432,000 years. Other people will say a yuga is, like I think in that one chart that we saw, 2,700 years. Okay, that's a big difference in time, right? Between those things. And I think when we are talking about something that is infinite, when you are getting into the sphere of not just us here on Earth doing our thing, but in the sphere of everything that exists, everything in the universe, or everything that all the forces that are in the macro rather than the micro, right? The bigger picture. You're talking about a space outside of time. So when we talk about yugas, just in the same way, like when we talk about communicating with spirit guides, communicating with angels, when you have these kinds of communications and you want to talk to them about time, as much as they want to be on your time scale, there's always going to be something of a disconnect there. Because they're not functioning in time. They approximate everything that's going on here because they're dealing with it on a level that's outside of what our experience is. And so if you say, well, something happened in a week, and they go, oh yeah, sure. Like, well, what's a week to somebody who's outside of time? Like, it's hard to understand time in that fashion. So I think this is why there are so many different versions of the yugas and the chart of the yugas. So, okay. Now the phase after, so the question is, what comes after Kali Yuga? If we are truly in Kali Yuga, there's usually I think it's called ekpyrasis, which is like or ekapyrasis, which is a era of purification, right? Then you move into the next Dwapara cycle, and Dwapara is called the Age of Energy. Now, in Dwapara, that is when technology increases. Okay, this is when we start to have technological developments. This is when we start to use technology to transcend the kind of limitations that we have as humans. Now, if this sounds quite familiar to you, it's because this is something that now in another version of the yugas, we have been in Dwapara Yuga for some time. Okay, so we are not actually in Kali Yuga. We are in this Age of Energy. Now, okay, if we think about the things that I have been talking about, the kinds of messages that have been coming in, and not just me, but what other people have been picking up, other people who, people consider to be reliable, even just other people, those of us here who maybe don't consider ourselves, ourselves to be great seers or mediums or anything like that. Didn't Puma talk about this too? Probably within his own system, yeah. There's definitely the idea. What this comes around to is that on the spring equinox this year, which is going to be, I don't have the exact date and time, roughly it's around March 21st, right? Whenever spring begins officially, whenever the equinox comes in, 0 degrees Aries in the Western system, that this is going to be the end of a yuga, okay? And I think Puma talks about this to some degree within whatever system of cycles that he talks about within his own belief system. But the thing is that, okay, the thing that I thought was interesting is that we are assuming that we are moving out of Kali Yuga into this period of fiery purification or something, or we're moving into this Dwapara age. But there are other Hindu thinkers, sages, gurus who have said, no, you've been in Dwapara and you're going to be in Dwapara till about the year 4000 or something. That's another interpretation of this. But what I'm kind of getting is, which I thought was very interesting, is no, actually, and Joanne says yes. Yeah, what everybody's missing here is that we're actually probably starting to move out of Dwapara into Treta, which is the age of intuition. Okay, and during Treta Yuga, this is when, goodness, it's funny. I think when Sam is on, she's the one who talks about when I do this, when it's almost like there's something that's trying to come through, right? During Treta Yuga, that is when we are encouraged to have intuitive knowing, that this is the way that we are going to know things. Like it's like our understanding of technology and so forth. When you get to the end of that kind of a thing, because remember Dwapara Yuga also precedes Kali Yuga on the other half of the other side of the cycle. Okay, we're getting ready to start a new cycle. When a cycle is on its decline, Dwapara Yuga also comes into play. One interpretation was that when the Buddha came to the earth, the Gautama Buddha, and when Krishna appeared as an avatar of Vishnu, that this was during the last Dwapara Yuga. Okay, so because that's when new religious systems can start. Okay, I don't think throat chakra activate. Yeah, yes, something's trying to be said here. But so when we had the descending Dwapara Yuga, that was like when we had like the birth of a lot of these different religions and things. We've kind of gone through the Kali Yuga period, which we have become increasingly focused on material things. We've been increasingly focused on the rational mind. There's been more of a patriarchal thing where everything becomes utilitarian. It becomes functional. It's about, even our ideas about evolution in human beings are, well, what's the function? Evolutionary psychology, right? The idea that all of your emotions and things serve a function. We're all machines. We're all meat with eyes, right? This is a function, right? And to get into Treta Yuga says to move out of that kind of space. This is definitely, to me, the hallmark of a technological age. It's not that, and again, it's not that in any of these yugas that they're necessarily bad or evil. We are, again, in the West, consumed with the idea that something is either good or bad. It's not that either any of these phases are necessarily have to be good and bad in and of themselves. Great things can come out of these periods. It's not that it just means, oh, it's going to be it's all bad and darkness, and it's all a year of tower cards. It's like, it's not, although tower cards actually would represent the breakdown and moving into a new phase. But you know what I mean? It's not that we have to look at everything as a negative. And I think that it's more likely that we are moving towards Treta Yuga, which again, I feel like in a certain sense, if you want to talk about, absolute proof and evidence, I mean, and certainly it's anybody's guess, including the people who study these things routinely. But it seems to me, I feel like that is more what we're talking about, because we are talking about advanced uses of technology, but we've also being pushed towards use of our intuition. Remember, one of the things Azrael has talked about is the way in which we are flipping from a realm that's going to be masculine to being more feminine. Now we do have Pluto in Aquarius here. The Pluto in Aquarius, it's almost like we're going through this transitional period to show us, okay, what are the appropriate uses of technology? And that then it's going to be this kind of moving into a phase where our intuitive knowing is going to be the thing that's privileged. Because part of the reason I offer intuitive development classes and do things like that, even in the work that I do, I've been an academic for how many years, right? I have always been a reader and a learner, and I've going to school probably since I got my bachelor's degree. I was going to school almost constantly until I had a gap between my second master's and my doctorate. But I tend to be a person who's always functioned in an academic world. And when I decided to quit my job, I was like, I got to this point where something was telling me like, no, you need to focus more on intuitive development. You need to focus more on that. You need to focus more on that inner kind of knowing. And that's the kind of thing that I share with you folks, is kind of like, okay, how do we develop our intuitive knowing? How do we transition into that? And the fact that we are being told to transition away from an idea that says that we are all machines to an idea that says that we need to know, what you need to trust your heart and you need to trust your intuition. This message comes up repeatedly. And to me, what that says is like, I think our understanding of the time is off. And so to a certain degree, that may be subjective. I mean, if we're like, yeah, everything sucks, we must be in Kali Yuga. I mean, you kind of feel like that's kind of the reason that it gets interpreted that way. But I'm like, no, I think we've been in a technological age. Certainly we had the industrial age, if you go back to the 18th and 19th century, right? We've been in these periods of times where the sciences and everything, where we've increased our technology. And now we are at a point where we have to decide, where our technology is developing to a point where we have to decide what is the appropriate and ethical use of that in a society. Because ethics are something that applies to a society. And Joanne says, go with your gut. Yeah, well, it's going with your gut, and it's also just, it's learning about ways of knowing that are not just all about what you see with the eyes. One of the things I find really interesting, I was thinking about this today, was when we were talking, because I was having a conversation the other day about autism and the autism spectrum, which, mind you, is a spectrum. It's not like it's one uniform thing. But one possible feature of autism, I'm just going to say that, I'm not going to say that everybody who's autistic necessarily experiences this, but there can be a kind of literalism to the way that they understand things. There might be a difficulty understanding colloquial language or metaphors or things like that, or just idioms, like idiomatic language. They may take very language. Like if you say to an autistic, how we say STFU, and we might just say, I have a friend who always say, shut the front door instead. Like if you say that to that, they might literally think you want them to get up and shut the front door. Like, like you have to believe it to see it, is what Joanne is saying. It's like there's a thing here where there's an understanding, there's a very literal understanding of things. And that's an interesting thing that happens with language. Part of the way that the human brain makes stories, yes, my daughter was like that, is what Joanne's saying. Yes. And actually I was kind of thinking of your daughter when we were talking about this, but I mean, I had seen others examples of this as well. The idea is that when you are when you take things very, very literally, it's almost like what you see is kind of what you get, and we may be interpreting the world in that kind of fashion and interpreting language in that kind of fashion. Stories and storytelling have to do with the way in which we are able to create metaphors, in the way in which we are able to symbolically talk about things that our mind, you can't talk about literally. Even concept like the reason you have scriptures and religion is because, you know, when you're talking about a concept like God, God is not, if you think of God as a literal being that's like hanging out on a throne somewhere with, with long, looking like Zeus or whatever, that's not what's really meant by God. And I think a lot of people try to look at things in very literal, material kind of terms. And that's not, that's what it really, language not only can talk about things that are in front of us, but it can also point us to something that's higher. I was explaining this to a religion student the other day who's a Pentecostal who talked about, well, he doesn't like the Catholic Church and all of their idols. I said, those aren't idols. I said, those are icons. There's a difference between idolatry and iconography. Idolatry is like a fetish. You look at the object and the object is the thing. Okay. When we talk about, like that is like in other words, the deity is the object. Now, of course, in Eastern religion, there's the idea of the Murti, but we won't get into that right now. Most of the time when you see a lot of these statues, you walk into a cathedral and you see, the flying buttresses and all that kind of stuff. What it's trying to do is point your attention to the greater reality that's outside of language. Okay. But a lot of times, even people not on the spectrum will translate that very literally. They look at it as a very literal thing. The cross itself is the thing, right? The copy of the Bible itself is the thing. And it's like, no, it's pointing you to something. Okay. And Joanne just said, took lots of speech and language teacher. Yes. Well, right. Exactly. When people are in that, when that's the way that they interpret things, then they have to be taught like that. Okay, well, no, this is how this works. So, right. So I just think that's kind of interesting. I think it's an interesting outgrowth of this time, the way in which that, we're kind of seeing, and the way in which I think we're almost getting to a point in our culture where the way that we see things, it's getting to a point that just what our eyes tell us is somehow not enough. There's a great book, and I've talked about this book before, called The Black Goddess and the Sixth Sense. And unfortunately, it's by Peter Redgrave. And unfortunately, this book is it Redgrave or Redgrove? It's one or the other. In any case, I think it's out of print now, unfortunately. And Ellen, our friend Ellen, Spiral Priestess on Instagram, last time I saw her in London, she had found a copy of this book for like £2 in a charity shop. I was like, oh, lucky you. And she gave it to me on long-term loan. So I will give it back to her at some point. But if you go, say, on a used book site, this book usually costs at least a couple $100 if you can find a copy. Unfortunately, I don't know, libraries might have it or something, but it's very much, The Black Goddess and the Sixth Sense is a great book, not only on intuitive knowing, but it also talks about other senses that we have that we don't use. The sense of smell, the sense of touch, the way in which, we talk about the auric field, right? And the fact that when something comes into your auric field, it's almost like it's a static, right? That something can come into your field energetically that maybe you don't see with your eyes. And we assume, oh, well, I don't see it with my eyes, so I'm just making that up. It's not a real thing. We rely very heavily on the eyes. You'll notice in Greek mythology that prophets are always blind because they're able to see things without the eyes. That's why anytime anybody, whether it be Tiresias, who's the most famous of the blind prophets, and Anchises, who's the father of Aeneas, he tells something he's not supposed to tell. The fact that he made love to Aphrodite and that Aeneas was actually the product of his relationship with Aphrodite, it was like, okay, you can't tell anybody this, but he couldn't resist. And so Zeus struck him blind. It's like, no, you're not supposed to tell anybody that. So he also in the Aeneid has a gift of prophecy. In Hecuba, I think it's is it Polymestor or is it Polydorus? I get the two names confused. But in any case, the one who betrays Hecuba and kills her son, the women go and they take their needles and they jab him into his eyes and they blind him. And then he becomes a prophet. Oedipus, the most famous example, blinds himself and then he becomes this kind of sacred being because he's no longer seeing things with his eyes. And so to me, that's the characteristic of Treta Yuga. You're seeing things without the eyes. Okay? You see things without the eyes. And what we see in front of us, you start to realize is not always reliable. So it's going to be interesting to see where this takes us in the future. But that was kind of the implication, was that we were moving more towards Treta Yuga, which is a reason to rejoice, because if we were really at the end of Kali Yuga, then we would be talking about like another 1,200 years in theory or whatever of just absolute chaos and destruction. And that's not what any of the messages are. The messages are no, you're going to have not only like, are we talking about certain technological advances that may teach us certain things, but also moving into a space where, you know, people can communicate without words, where, you know, things are understood without having to be evaluated and analyzed, right? And where the connections between people are seen. And that's actually a really great space to be moving into. But of course, between any yuga, there's always kind of this like adjustment period that goes on. But my understanding is that that period's not going to be as long as people think it's going to be. Like we all think like, oh, you know, like we're not talking about a 1,200-year period of adjustment. Okay. Like we are at a different point in the cycle than we think we are, is kind of the message that I have. So I don't know. Interesting thoughts. Something to think about if you want to delve into that. I'm probably going to do, I might do a podcast on that actually for Tonia, for those who are subscribed to my Patreon, on the, you know, the paid subscribers at the $5 level and above. I always do special episodes for them. So I might talk a little bit more about yugas, and particularly given that podcast, its connection to Kali and things like that. But yeah, there is definitely, wherever we are, there's something that's coming to an end. But it seems to me from the messages I'm getting that we are in a much brighter place than we think we are. We are still wringing our hands in woe and thinking, you know, everything's going to fall apart and be terrible. And to be fair, it's not like there's not things in the external world that don't make us feel that way. But so it's not like people are being, you know, irrational or pessimistic, you know, unduly, right? But I do think that we are moving, it does seem to me like we are moving into a better space, because the message I keep getting from the angels is like, you know, stop, you know, uchim, you know, frown not, like don't be sad. You're like the most awesome thing is about to happen. Like I get the rune Wunjo a lot. I get the word muz, which is the angelic word for joy. There's gonna be joy, joy, joy. So yeah, sounds like Ren and Stimpy, right? But yeah, this is an era of joy that's coming in. So yeah, and again, I mean, how long of a period of adjustment there's going to be? I mean, it's anybody's guess, but it does feel like that this is like there is definitely something coming to an end, and there is a restart that is coming up. So some interesting thoughts there. I'm going to do our reading for today and see what we have here. And yeah, interesting. Oh wow! All right, we got a lot of 2 energy here. Well, we got at least a couple 2 energies here. All right, and we're starting with the 2 of Cups, friendliness. Okay, so friendliness, yeah, this is about connection. Now, 2 of Cups, when we think about it in a more, I don't know, a more general, if you were doing a tarot reading for, you know, what's coming up in my life, I mean, the 2 of Cups could indicate a relationship for somebody, right? A love relationship. If somebody's looking for love, frequently people will do that. And so the friendliness card can have to do with that. I think in a reading more that, in this case, friendliness has more to do with the way in which we connect with people at the heart level. Okay. How do you connect with people in the heart space and on the heart level? Okay. So yeah, so this is about and again, this is calling it the card of friendliness. It's not calling it the card of like romance. Now, of course, Valentine's Day is coming up next week, right? So, you know, I guess there's that. But no, I've been seeing this card a lot. And I think what it has to do with is, again, the way in which we can respond to each other from the heart. When I was talking yesterday about respect for people, that's just the thing, not just seeing people as a means to an end, but rather as seeing people from the heart space, seeing people as human beings with feelings and needs, and to be compassionate, because, you know, sometimes people behave in their best way and sometimes they don't. And again, everybody has to set whatever their own appropriate boundaries are in any kind of a situation. But at the same time, when you look at people through that lens, a lot of times we often have a defensive lens, and we assume that we may assume that a lot of situations are like personal attacks, or we may assume that, oh, well, that person's just doing that because they don't like me, or they want to do this, or they want to do that. And really what it may be from the heart space, it's kind of like, this may be a person who's crying out for attention. This could be a person who is, you know, for whatever reason, you know, is also acting out against people because they're reflecting their own crap on other people, right? So, but we all have our crap. So that's actually kind of the basis of the whole idea of forgiveness, is the idea that you're able to have an empathy with somebody else and say, okay, that person did something hurtful, but they're operating from a place of either ignorance, or they're operating from a place of hurt. And they're behaving the way, like if you had a wounded animal, okay, and that animal started to, and you wanted to help that animal and it started to growl at you, I mean, you're not going to be like, well, you know, well, let's kill it now, because you know, obviously the fact that this animal's growling at me means it hates me, and so therefore I'm going to you know, I'm going to defend myself by attacking it, or whatever, or fighting. And really, what you need is, you need to have time and patience, and you know, maybe, you know, leave food out and kind of walk away, just something to earn the trust, to let them know that, no, you're being brought into a space where you can heal, not in a space where you're going to be harmed. Okay. Of course, we also have to be careful too when we go out to help people, because sometimes it's like, again, Alan Watts talked about it with the how does he put it? It says, you know, allow me to help you. You know, let me help you out of the water lest you drown, says the monkey, taking the fish and putting him safely up the tree. You know what I mean? Sometimes our efforts to help don't, sometimes we need to let people figure their own stuff out. Okay, that is basically what I'm saying. Or we may be trying to interpret things from our own context. In anthropology, they call that ethnocentricity. It's the idea that myself in my culture, what I have, what I want, and what I think is an achievement is going to be the same thing that everybody wants. So you will go. It was like the British colonial woman who went to Africa and felt sorry for the poor women who had to carry jars on their head and go to get water. So she gave them all like washing machines or something, and they were all like very polite about it, but ignored those and continued to go to the water thing, because she did not understand. She thought that was a chore, that was a labor, that was a task. But for them, it was a social thing. It's like, hey, we all get together and then we share what's going on in the village. You know, there's not necessarily an understanding of where the person's coming from sometimes when we want to help people. So that's something you always have to be aware of. Anyway, this is about real connection, the inner feeling of which we are unaware. And here's our burden card. Okay, this is, where are we carrying the burdens of others? Where are we allowing others, the expectations of others, to weigh us down? Where are we letting other people tell us who we, you know, who we should be, and what our priorities are, and where we should be going? And you know, so you've got this guy who looks exhausted climbing this mountain, carrying this character on his back, which we're not really sure whether this character is male or female, but you know, and they're carrying a rooster on their head, which I think is kind of funny. But it's just kind of like, you know, throw this person off, throw this character off. You don't need to carry that with you. You don't need to carry the expectations of others with you. But unconsciously, we may be still doing that. And we should not beat ourselves up over that, by the way. This is something that has to be worked through. And as it comes up, you work through it. You don't want to just be like, oh, no, I shouldn't do that. I shouldn't do that. A lot of times we'll do that. And we'll say like, oh, I shouldn't feel this way. Well, you do feel that way. And you have to acknowledge how you feel. And then once you've acknowledged it and given voice to it in whatever way you need, then hopefully that will help you break out of the loop and move forward. In theory. I mean, sometimes depending on how deeply ingrained it is, it can take a very long time. So the external feeling of which we are aware is totality. Okay, so this is our 5 of Wands. But remember, in this deck, you've got the trapeze artists, and one is grabbing the hands of the other. So you're in free fall in the air. Your legs are one place, and you're trying to move safely to the next place. You're over the void, right? And so you have to pay attention. Totality means you are totally in the moment. You are focusing on the things that you need to do. But unconsciously, we may be bringing in, we may think that friendliness and connection involves having to take on the burdens and responsibilities of others, but that's not how it works. We need to be totally focused on what we're doing. And yeah, speaking of big drops, we have the 2 of Swords, the schizophrenia card. So what do we have? We have this person who is suspended between these 2 things. And the question is like, do I try to retract and go here, or do I try to move forward and go over and try to hopefully, make my way over here? And the only thing that this person can do is let go. And that means letting go of both the head and the heart in a way. It's not so much, one has to let go of the head. This is a sword suit. Okay. So swords have to do with the intellect. One has to let go of, your mind is at an impasse and it gets stuck. I was talking to a friend of mine last night who's an anthropologist who happened to message me, and he was talking about what did he call it? Crisis paralysis, which is a concept. I forget which anthropologist had this idea, but the idea of crisis paralysis, and that what happens is that sometimes when we are very overwhelmed with what's going on around us, we become paralyzed. We can't move. It's like we have so much to do that we don't do anything. It's different from fight or flight in a way, because in both fight or flight, you're actually doing something. You're moving in a direction. When you're frozen, you can't move. You just stand there and you're like, ooh, you can't move ahead. So this is kind of that frozen state, and it's saying you got to move. You got to move. You got to move in a direction. You've got to break out of the mental trap. You've got to stop standing there transfixed and take an action. Of course, I would say you don't want to take a rash action. You want to make sure, because I think you can have crisis paralysis, and then you can have crisis, what the other word would be. But basically, it would be the way in which we might, crisis impulse maybe. Taking an impulsive reaction that's not necessarily coming from our intuition, but more coming from a knee-jerk reaction to whatever the stressor is. We're not taking a step back. We're kind of just, trying to, it's just like, the sky is falling. I have to run, like you want to be focused. You want to be focused on what it is that you're doing. Our outcome card, we had this again the other day, didn't we? The 3 of Wands. 3 of Wands comes up a lot. And this is the card of experiencing. And experiencing. Okay. This is like what you really want to be doing here. Okay. When we talk about connection, this is an experience of being alive. And to experience being alive, to see what the opportunities are in the moment, you have to be in the moment. You have to be in the moment. You have to feel everything that's going on with yourself. Okay. And feel it. You don't always have to evaluate it. You don't always have to, when you sit there and go, I am feeling this, or I am thinking, now the mind's trying to interpret what's going on, right? You just want to feel whatever it is. You ever have that where you wake up and you might feel sad, or you might feel a certain way and you go, why am I feeling this way, right? Like we always feel like there's got to be a reason, Sometimes there is no reason. Sometimes you just feel that way. So you want to kind of feel where you are. Where are you in the moment? And the thing is, if you are in a place that you are uncomfortable with, then a lot of times you just kind of have to experience that. You want to sit with it to move through it, because eventually whatever it is that's making you that way, there's going to be a voice given to it in some way, either in an action or in your words or in some other thing that you do. So definitely something to be thinking about there. I think right now a lot of people, yeah, I mean, people are overwhelmed in what's going on in society right now, and I don't think it matters where you are. I think there's a lot that's going on. There is a lot of changes, even if your life seems like it's pretty much going on as normal. The astrology of what's going on right now, I mean, there's like a force that's occurring, and that's just getting stronger throughout the year, that is hard to ignore, at least on a unconscious level. So it's really kind of demanding that we tune into ourselves, that we be authentic to ourselves. And the things that are stopping us from doing that are the things that right now, this is the period for, we're going to be moving into some retrogrades. I mean, that's the period for rectification, for saying, oh, okay, you know what? I keep repeating this pattern. And eventually, if you reach a point where the body starts to understand that it doesn't need to repeat the pattern. Okay. And it's more than just, I'm going to think about it and say an affirmation. It's like something that you feel in the body. I mean, you can say affirmations if you want to, but but that's the thing that really makes the change. It's not our mind trying to control it. It's that we just allow it to be. And that's why I think we're getting experiencing card a lot. Okay. We're at the end of the live stream time. Thank you guys so much for joining me. I'm really happy that all of you were able to come here today. I do hope that you found this live stream interesting, that you found the reading interesting. If you have any thoughts on yugas and things, a lot of you know where to find me, so you can feel free to reach out. I'm going to be, I've got to get going because I actually have a lot to do this morning before I have to go to teach this class at noon. So I hope you all have a great day, and I will